of the hardest part of having been a successful executive and then going into any kind of advisory role is the compassion piece. And I think spinning it a little bit differently, it's having a compassion for your client situation because it's no longer about you, right? So you have to leave your ego behind.
Hello and welcome to the new episode of Flex Executive Code. Every time we bring you one expert with whom we can talk about the Flex Executive economy, how we are building it up, how we can actually learn from the expertise of different professionals who can guide us in terms of taking this journey forward. At Board Matchup, we have been actually working on connecting executives with opportunities. But it's actually not just a matching service, it's much more than that. We need to make sure that we are able to support the organizations who are looking at how to use Flex executives. We also want to make sure that we are able to support those executives who are looking at their next chapter. But it's not easy because each individual has a different experience, different journey, and different circumstances. And we need to make sure that we are able to provide them enough information to be able to make the right decision. Today, on Flex Executive Code, we have Mary Cianni. I came to know Mary when she was working with Willis Stars Watson and then supporting us with a lot of M&A work that we were doing post-merger integration, particularly, which was my responsibility. And I know that with her work before that with Conferry as well as subsequently with NYU, where she was doing a lot of work with different leaders, guiding them, supporting them, and also directionally sharing what the next chapter could look like potentially, how leadership can grow. And then the best thing was Mary came out with a book where she talked about how people can actually get ready to be a consultant, to be an advisor. And that's the topic of our conversation today. I thought no one could actually explain this better. And I was very privileged to actually be interviewed by Mary for that book. And I think that book was something which came out to be much more pragmatic simply because she did not use theory. She used a lot of experiences of different individuals in going through that journey. So, with that, Mary, welcome to the show.
It's always good to see you. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. I wanted to start with your book, which came out a couple of years back. But I think that book had a lot of content which was absolutely the right one for my audience because many of them are thinking about their next chapter. I see a very blurred line between what we call as advisors and what we call sometimes as consultants. But I know that the content of your book could be actually relevant for everyone. And there you talk about multiple different dimensions. So I want you to kind of paint the picture for my audience here first on what did you talk about, how did you go about writing that book, and also what were some of the key messages that you came out with through that.
Sure. Thank you. So the book really stemmed from my desire to help my students who are, most of them are in transition. They're 40, 50 years of age. They've had successful careers and they're looking to go into consulting and coaching. And I knew that I could teach, and we can all learn very easily the science of consulting, how to put the project plan together, how to diagnose the problem. But the emotional aspects, what I think of as the art of consulting, is a little bit more difficult to teach in a traditional way. So we all know the power of stories. And I thought if I could not only share my story, because I was someone who went into consulting in my early 40s, but also the stories of others, people like yourself who are either independent consultants or working with large consulting firms, that those stories would give them the insight into what it takes to not just be a consultant, but to become that trusted advisor. So that was really the premise, the idea of how can we have people understand what it's like to stand in front of a client and not know an answer to something, or to be dealing and partnering with your client on a problem neither one of you have ever experienced before, which tends to be the way of the world today. So I interviewed 36 consultants, and it was really the themes of courage, curiosity, and compassion that came from those stories. So I didn't have a preconceived notion of what the thematic arc would be of the book. It really stemmed from reading the stories over and over and over again and isolating those three things. And I think they make sense as I think about my own experience. I mean, you need to have the courage to take a risk every day is a new day in consulting or advising. You fail. It's part of it's part of the job. But to have the courage to try again, to put yourself in those situations. And I think importantly, then the second attribute of curiosity, where if we're not curious about our clients' industries, about who they are as people, about what's happening in the world and what's happening in the areas that we consult in, we become stagnant. And to be honest, we're doing our clients a disservice when we don't know about them. And then I think compassion winds up being last. I think if I rewrote the book, I would put it first because I think it's foundational. If having compassion first and foremost for ourselves and not beating ourselves up every time something goes wrong, having compassion for the experience of our clients, because typically you and I are brought in when the client is going through a major change or a transformation. And those are emotional times, and our clients are experiencing it not just as the leader of the project, but as someone going through it themselves. And I think compassion for our teams and really being able to understand that we're all human beings, and we're not always having a perfect day every day. So those are the three themes that really came out from the stories. And as I thought about them and thought about my own experience, I think they really do, for me, contain the superpowers or the key attributes of what it takes to be successful.
The whole thing of art and science of going through that journey really resonates with me. I also talk about change management and talk about the art and science of change management. And I think the science part is certainly much easier, where you can have some predictable outcome of 2 plus 2 being 4. But the art side is where it actually starts to get difficult or much more ambiguous. I keep saying this to many of the leaders that after 20-25 years of experience, everybody is knowledgeable enough to be able to do the job that they need to do. What differentiates them from the other one is actually this part, which is the art part, in your words. You have seen so many people transitioning, Mary. Would you like to talk about further a little bit of differentiation because of that art portion or the compassion piece?
Yeah, I think probably the hardest part of having been a successful executive and then going into any kind of advisory role is the compassion piece. And I think spinning it a little bit differently, it's having a compassion for your client situation because it's no longer about you, right? So you have to leave your ego behind. You're not the decision maker. It's not about how much you know. And I've seen consultants really struggle with clients because they saw those opportunities as a way to show everything they knew and how smart they were. And it's not that that's not important. I think your experience is the credibility that you start with, why you got in the door in the first place. But then you have to remember that you're there in service to your client. It's about helping the client look good. And it's not our job to make the decisions. It's not our job to lead. Our job is to help our client make decisions that are in the best interest of the organization. Our job is to help the client be the best leader that they can be. So I think sometimes whether you're sitting on a board or you're being brought in as an advisor, we've spent years making the decisions, being the ones held accountable. And now we have to remember that we're not that person anymore. That's our client. And that could be a difficult challenge for some folks, particularly in the beginning.
I mean, I've seen how sometimes people struggle with that portion because they're so used to saying what they want to happen, and then they see it happen because they say it so, which is very different in a client relationship. And you also use the word ego, which is very interesting. I was in one of the roundtables recently with some of the executives, and I was generally asking them, what has been your real struggle? And one of the person actually raised hand, said that, I'm honestly speaking, my biggest problem was ego. The moment he said that, a lot of people actually came back and said, yeah, I mean, directly, indirectly articulated, we did have this problem. But I would love to hear your views on how you've seen people actually deal with that part, because I think that's a real difficult part, which also sometimes actually inhibits people from being effective in their advisory work. So it's not only about decision making; it's much more than that in real sense, isn't it?
Having an ego is not a bad thing. So let me just say that we all need to have that positive sense of ourselves to be able to put ourselves in these situations that are not always comfortable. The challenge sometimes is as executives, we've become associated with our title. And titles matter, right? We've worked hard to become that vice president, or we've worked hard to become that CEO. And those titles hold a lot of gravitas for
Correct.
others. Others automatically know what our stature is. When you're a consultant or an advisor, those titles go away. So it's almost like we have to reestablish who we are and our own identity that isn't linked to a corporate structure. And that becomes through finding the meaning in the way that we add value to our clients. That it's not again about our title, it's about how we add value, how we find meaning in the work that we're doing. And so when in one of the mergers at Willis Towers Watson, they made the decision not to put titles on the business cards. And initially, some of us were a little, well, that's like our I'm a global leader. I want to have that on my card. But the reality was, it didn't matter. We were representing the firm. And I think if you're going into a consulting firm, that's an important thing also to consider is you're not representing yourself. You're representing the reputation, the integrity, the capability of the firm.
Right. Right. I'll change the gears a little bit. One of the things that we are hearing and we are seeing actually is a huge disruption, particularly for the consulting industry as such, thanks to AI. And we're also seeing that a lot of large firms are actually changing their model on how they do that and how they are able to actually work with the clients, in other words.
Mhm.
What impact are you seeing, particularly for the segment that we are talking about? It's more of advisory work done by individuals, the segment that we are trying to address here. Do you see any impact? Do you see anything that people actually can prepare for?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I think that AI can be our friend, it can be a team member. So the first thing would be that when you go out on your own, you no longer have your title, but you no longer have all of the administrative support. You don't have anyone to delegate to. When you're starting out, particularly if you're a solo practitioner, you're on your own. So AI can really become your partner in terms of the utility of that. I had someone at a large consulting firm say to me that they're much more concerned when their senior partners leave these days because they have this AI, all of these AI agents that can help them look like a large firm. So it's not that they're out on their own, they've got a capability. So we now have a capability that can augment what it is we're doing as a consultant. But so it can be a tool, and that's what the way that I see it is as a tool. But it's not going to replace the kind of advising that your clients, these senior executives, are able to do because it's that experience that we bring of having been there before, of being able to see the gray areas in a way that you can't through a technology tool. It's also the ability to understand our clients and their context, to figure out the right pacing of the solutions, to figure out the cultural aspects that are going to influence that approach or that intervention. So it doesn't bring that experience. I just wrote a LinkedIn blog where I talk about being on the road with my GPS, and it kept trying to make me turn. And I knew that wasn't the right thing to do. So I kept at it. But then I pulled over and I realized I'd put in the wrong address. So it was human error. But had I completely trusted that the GPS or the technology knew more than me, I would have wound up in the wrong place. And I think that's just a lesson to say it's really our experience, our intuition that helps us to understand if we're headed in the right direction.
I love the way you actually articulated this. I mean, my takeaway from what you just said is two things. One is, of course, it can actually, when you say that it can make a partner look like a big firm, not a single individual consultant, is absolutely, spot on. That's one. And the second thing that you mentioned was absolutely about judgment. People having that understanding, their knowledge, their experience, and therefore the judgment, which makes them also decide that when to draw the line on using technology versus using your own judgment. And that's extremely important for the person to use and leverage.
It's no different than when you have an analyst do the work. You always checked it, right? You
Correct.
always peer reviewed it. You always had another expert take a look at it before you distributed it to the client. So I think it's we have to think about it in that same way.
Talking about executives who are preparing for their next chapter and therefore they're considering different pathways. One of them could be doing an advisory work, could be many other things. Some people, they want to go into their hobby or passion and pursue that. And I know that you are already in that place yourself, but would love to hear your inputs on how to prepare for that.
Yeah, I think there's two different aspects. So it's how to prepare for your role, and then how to prepare for the business of that role. So if we talk about the role, the first thing is to really think about and to be clear about what your purpose is, because there are a lot of us out there. So what is going to differentiate you from others? And that is a combination of things, right? It's your experience, it's your area of expertise, it's who you are as a person. How do you approach these relationships? What's your point of view about the advisor role? How are you going to deliver it differently? One of the stories in my book was someone who was having a conversation like this and said, bring me your pitch, sell me what it is, come back to me and sell me what you think your service is going to be, what value you can add to a client, and I'll let you know if I'm going to buy it or not. So I think testing out what those sound bites are, what your mission statement is, how you're going to position yourself with some of your own trusted advisors to really hone that is going to be very important, and to think about how you're going to stand out. And then a lot of the solo entrepreneurs that I interviewed in the book started out, almost every one of them, with a former colleague, someone that they had worked for. So the other thing to prepare is to think about your network. Think about who might be those folks that you can not betray their friendship or make them uncomfortable, but even to think about having them test your idea, maybe a gentle way of getting them to know what it is you're going to be doing. So I think it's getting clear about that. And increasingly, I believe there's strength in having a niche. And sometimes I've spoken with consultants who are independent consultants who initially try to do everything, to be everything to their clients. And your message gets muddied. People don't know what to come to you for. And when they found that they did develop a particular niche, either in terms of an area of expertise or a type of industry, I know someone who works exclusively with DJs. Their business actually grew because they had a clear message. They were filling a need in the market. On the financial side, we know that consulting, whether you're in a firm or independent, has peaks and valleys. There's always going to be slow periods. There's things that happen outside of our control. So to make sure that financially you're set up to be able to manage that, to figure out when is the right timing. If you can start it as a side job and move into some kind of a part-time side job, it just gives you some sense of security so that you're not taking everything. And then I would say to have an exit strategy. That doesn't always work out, right? So I
Yeah.
know a lot of independents who've gone back to consulting firms or gone back into industry. And that's not failing. It might not have been just the right time, or it might not be for you. If I
Right.
have some of my students who read my book and say, wow, I didn't think consulting was for me, but now I think it is based on the book. And I have others who say, I thought it was for me, but you know what? I don't think it is. So I think we have to try things out, and that's where the courage comes in.
And again, so well said. I mean, the whole thing of trying to do everything can be a very tempting proposition, but in the process, people actually go all over the place and they don't know what to focus on. So having or building that niche is certainly very important, and it resonates with me completely. I keep saying the same thing in my own way, that there's something about your value proposition of expertise or depth of expertise, and the other one is the financial freedom. And if I were to make a four blocker out of that on your depth and financial freedom, I would say that people with a little bit of financial runway with the expertise building up are the north star of this, whereas people not having that are doing it either for survival or for hobbies. So
Right,
one
right,
of the
right.
two, which is not the best thing to happen. But it's important for people to actually plan. One has to actually think about how they are positioning themselves, what niche they are building, and that's what will actually get them some work. It is a crowded place. In spite of having the expertise and the niche, you mentioned that on positioning and personal branding in a way. But tell me how somebody who is kind of starting off alone and trying to get this done, how would the person do their personal branding, and what would be the best way of going about
Yeah. So I think it's helpful to have your own advisor to help you with that branding. So to really have someone, it could be a friend, a colleague, it could be someone that you hire who works in that area, your own coach, who helps you really get clear about your message and can help you to see how all of your experiences tie together into a clear narrative. And if that's not your strength, if writing, if communications, if marketing is not your strength, then I would advise you to get some help, to have someone help you to do that, so that you become crystal clear as you start to go out with your website, you start to have conversations, you have a clear message. One of the best pieces of advice I got when I joined Towers Parent was from a senior person who told me, get your soundbite down. So when someone asks you, like, what do you do? Like, you can easily tell them what it is you do. It might sound different for different people, but be clear about what your message is. Be consistent about what you're responding to, what you're writing about, so that people start to see you in connection to those things.
And networking, certainly. I mean, I when I look back, not only for me myself, but also many people that I know who went through the journey, I think always the starting point was the network.
Yeah, and it's at this point that we need to have an ego. We can't be too humble. I think we have a hard time sometimes asking for help or putting
Right.
ourselves out there and bragging a little bit about what we can do for 15 minutes to go over something. But then to have that ego that says, yeah, we do have something to offer, right? So
Mhm.
to have a clear ask,
Yeah.
don't leave it to the other person to figure out what it is you need from
Correct.
them, because it may
Correct.
differ.
Very nice. Very. I'll again shift gears. We talked about this journey, but you have been working with multiple different senior executives as well as board, and I want to kind of talk about this because board matchup actually is a combination of both. I always say that our flex executives could be a board member somewhere, advisor somewhere else, a fractional executive somewhere else. But talking about board and talking about that as a pathway for people to look at and consider it seriously. Any views that you gathered over your last several years of research and work and the book that you came out with? How do you see that, and any views that you want to share with my audience?
So my experience with boards is really in two camps. One is on many of the projects that I was working on, we had an obligation to report to the board what we're doing. I think that's for people who want to become members of corporate boards. Gaining some nonprofit experience, I think, is a great way to do that. There are a lot of nonprofits who are looking for the kind of executive advice and experience. And it helps you to understand what the role of the board member is, that you're no longer management. It's a very different type of advisory role in terms of understanding how are you going to help the mission of that organization? How are you going to help them be sustainable? How are you going to help them to deal with the challenges that they're dealing with? But you're not management. And I've served on a couple of boards where sometimes the board members want to be the president or want to be one of the leaders, but that's not our role. So it gives you an opportunity to understand, and in the same way you come into your own persona as a trusted advisor, you need to figure out what kind of board member you can be. What's the value that you can add? Is it your industry expertise? Is it a commitment to that company, to that industry? So getting on a nonprofit board, I think, is a great way for people to get started and to have that board experience and to understand the kind of board assignments that may be best suited for them.
I also would say that although they are not for profit organizations, the governance requirement in those organizations is so big and so high that you can't kind of say that, okay, fine, because I'm doing it for not for profit. It's an easy one to do. So
Right.
it's
I
a
mean,
lot of learning as well.
I chaired our governance committee for many years, and that whole responsibility about the functioning of the board, making sure it's effective, making sure we're attracting the right kind of board members, it's the very same thing. And sometimes, particularly in higher ed, it might be even more challenging
Yeah.
given that we're not paid board members.
Awesome. Mary, thank you so much. I mean, this has been extremely valuable conversation. Any advice for people on this journey, whether they are already in there or something that we did not talk about, and you want to leave them with some thoughts from your end?
I think it's really this self-awareness. So maybe asking yourself a few questions. How comfortable am I in situations that are unstructured? because that's what advising is. So if you need in your job, you need a lot of role definition, a lot of role clarity, this may not be the best opportunity for you. I would go back to that point about what do you think you have to offer, and then finally, I would ask yourself, what value do you bring to your clients, and don't downplay what your own successes have been, because there was something about you that made that all happen. And I think understanding what our own unique attributes are, our own unique strengths, helps us to figure out whether this is the right path forward.
I can't help but to mention it here. I've seen the same thing. And that's where I also feel that platforms like Board Matchup or even many others come very handy when people are starting off, because normally executives don't talk about themselves enough, or they are not able to kind of put forward their value proposition with the same way that they should be doing to be able to get hired for some advisory work. And I've seen my colleagues who do this very effectively, actually, also in terms of negotiating on their behalf the right kind of fee, the right kind of matching. It helps a lot to be able to use some of these platforms. But very, very valuable inputs, Mary. Thank you so much for the time,
You're
and
welcome.
thank you for sharing all the different inputs that you did share.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.